Nuclear threats. Do they really exist in today's society? Or are they something that are just perceived, or is it about a paranoia? Well, we're here to tell you that that's not the case. Nuclear threats do exist. And post-World War II, we have seen several countries acquire nuclear weapons. Join us as we take you through a timeline of post-World War II nuclear development.
In 1933, Hungarian theoretical physicist Leo Szilard had speculated that it would be possible to create a nuclear chain reaction. Szilard was aware that this idea would ultimately lead to destruction. Thus, he obtained the necessary patents to make this theoretical reaction a reality, in the hopes that under his possession it would never be used. As Germany began to descend into chaos under Hitler's rule, Szilard feared that German scientists would develop a means to initiate a nuclear chain reaction, capable of wreaking havoc on the majority of Europe. Thus, on August 2, 1939, approximately 1 month before World War II began, Szilard, Enrico Fermi, and Albert Einstein wrote a letter to President Roosevelt warning him of the capabilities of the technology that would eventually come together as the atomic bomb. In traditional American fashion, instead of adhering to the warning he had been given, Roosevelt set in motion a top-secret research and development project to make this bomb a reality. We now infamously refer to this project as the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project brought together the brightest scientific minds to develop 4 atomic bombs: the Gadget, Little Boy, Fat Man, and a 4th bomb that was never used. The Gadget, the Manhattan Project's test bomb, was used in the world's first detonation of a nuclear weapon. Little Boy and Fat Man were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, respectively, resulting in over 210,000 casualties. Thus, the use of these nuclear technologies in combat sent waves of fear throughout the world.
From the bombs the United States dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, neither the U.S. nor any other nation has posed a nuclear threat to other nation-states. Although we have never experienced a nuclear war that has impacted us globally, the OTA, U.S. Congress Office of Technology Assessment, has hypothesized the outcome of what could potentially happen to our world and how it could affect different aspects of the world if this were to occur. In the case that the world would undergo nuclear war, the global impact would be extremely substantial. If there was a limited nuclear war, which refers to the use of minimal nuclear forces and only focuses on targeting military facilities, it would be likely that the parties involved would not be able to maintain the war because of their military being wiped out. Not to mention the aftermath of the war that would affect the populations of the parties involved. Many people will die out from direct impact, others would be wounded or permanently damaged or disabled. In addition, exposure to higher levels of radiation would lead to higher death tolls caused by cancer. A limited nuclear war would also impact the economy because there would be a higher than normal level of exposure to radiation in the soil, leading to a decline in salvageable crops that people would use for food. This would increase the cost of crops and agriculture, making it difficult to purchase, and that could potentially lead to famine in many parts of the world. The negative impacts of a limited nuclear war or the parties involved are endless. If the world were to undergo an all-out nuclear war, it is very possible that the very human race would go extinct. This likely serves as a primary reason as to why global leaders would never choose to engage in a large-scale nuclear war.
In 1962, the world was about to experience yet another nuclear threat. The constant demonstration of power during the Cold War reached a critical point when the Soviet Union and United States were close to nuclear conflict. The cause of this nuclear threat was a failed attempt of the U.S. to overthrow the Castro regime in Cuba with the Bay of Pigs invasion. During the planning of a new Kennedy administration plan called Operation Mongoose in July 1962, the Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had reached a secret agreement with the Cuban Premier Fidel Castro, allowing the Soviet Union to place nuclear missile sites in Cuba to deter future invasion attempts. The general construction occurred during the late summer and was discovered by the U.S. during Soviet flights on September 4, 1962. On this discovery, President Kennedy issued a public warning.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man.
Despite the warning and quarantine, further surveillance revealed the continued construction on October 14th. Though no weapons were transported between Cuba and the Soviet Union as ships were inspected. Still, the Soviet missile sites were nearing completion. It seemed to be a virtual stalemate as the United States entered DEFCON 2. Surprisingly, a communication from Khrushchev has set hope for resolution. If there is no intention to doom the world to the catastrophe of thermonuclear war, then let us not only relax the forces pulling on the ends of the rope, let us take measures to untie that knot. We are ready for this. Further communication, an agreement was reached, and a resolution set, which involved the removal of the Soviet Union weapons from Cuba and the removal of Jupiter U.S. missiles from Turkey, and the compliance that the U.S. would not further attack Cuba. Having approached the brink of nuclear conflict, both superpowers began to reconsider the nuclear arms race and took the first steps in agreeing to a nuclear test ban treaty. During this period, it also allowed the fulfillment of the mutual assured destruction doctrine. The full-scale use of a high-yield weapon of mass destruction by two or more countries would cause the complete destruction of both the instigator and reciprocator. Since both the United States and Soviet Union had developed capabilities of launching a nuclear-tipped missile from a submerged submarine, completing the air, land, and sea triad. This capability allowed the possibility of survival in a first-strike attack, allowing for retaliation, meaning mutually assured destruction. This was an incentive such that once armed, neither side had any incentive to initiate a conflict or to disarm. Following this period of turmoil, both countries entered a détente, a form of thawing out the relationship between both countries. During this period, treaties were signed such as the SALT I and the Helsinki Accords. SALT I, also known as the Strategic Arms Limitations Talk Agreement, is a treaty which froze the number of strategic ballistic missile launchers at existing levels. It also provided for the addition of new submarine-launched ballistic missile launchers only after the same number of older intercontinental ballistic missile and submarine-launched ballistic missile launchers had been dismantled. The détente lasted for the most part until an accelerating reversal which began in 1979 as the Soviet war in Afghanistan due to Reagan ordering a massive buildup of the United States armed forces.
Let me share with you a vision of the future which offers hope. It is that we embark on a program to counter the awesome Soviet missile threat with measures that are defensive. Let us turn to the very strengths in technology that spawned our great industrial base and that have given us the quality of life we enjoy today. What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies?
The president saying the U.S. should build defensive and not offensive weapons. The president is proposing what nuclear planners have rejected for years. The anti-ballistic missile, or ABM, was scrapped by Washington in the 1970s precisely because it might work. Why? Because if either side felt safe from attack, that made nuclear war more acceptable and therefore more
11th and 13th of 1998, India surprised the world by conducting Operation Shutte, which was a series of 6 underground nuclear tests. It took place close to the border of Pakistan in Pokhran, Rajasthan. Shortly after these tests were conducted, Prime Minister WWII held a press conference declaring India as a nuclear state. Prior to the nuclear testing of 1998, India had run a nuclear test in 1974, which was ruled as a peaceful test. In 1998, when India declared itself a nuclear state, many countries around the world, including China, United States, and especially Pakistan, were not happy with this decision. Chinese leaders were concerned about further competition from India. The United States was also concerned about India's nuclear testing, in addition to being taken aback by their lack of knowledge about the extent of India's nuclear testing. Pakistan's reaction in response to India's nuclear test was a bit taken by surprise. The Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, Gohar Ayub, stated, "Pakistan is prepared to match India. We have the capability. We in Pakistan will maintain a balance with India in all fields." In response to India's decision on May 28th and 30th, Pakistan decided to conduct both Shagai-1 and Shagai-2, which were the code names for the underground nuclear testing. Pakistan also conducted 6 nuclear tests in Shagai district of Balochistan. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif commented on this saying, "We are watching the situation and we will take appropriate action with regard to our security," making it clear that Pakistan was ready to go against India should they initiate any hostilities. In July of 1999, India decided to adopt the no first use policy, which meant that they would not use nuclear weapons as a way of warfare unless they were attacked first. Pakistan, on the other hand, has refused to adopt to this no first use policy. Over the years, Pakistan and India have had many conflicts with regards to the use of nuclear weapons, but there have not been any major issues that would initiate to the use of these weapons.
On February 13, 1960, France became the 4th country to acquire nuclear weapons.
HR at Atomic City. Operational Commander General Allaret gave the final orders. Wind conditions perfect. Close to the detonating tower were military vehicles to be tested afterwards for radiation. Decontamination men stood by. The location 700 miles south of Algiers. The weeks of waiting over, all set now for the countdown. If the bomb was successfully detonated, France claimed she would become one of the atomic powers. At a cost of £90 million and in defiance of foreign objection, France exploded her first atomic bomb.
France conducted several other tests in Sahara Desert and continued in the southern Pacific Ocean until 1996. On September 27, 1996, at the United Nations, along with the United States, United Kingdom, Russia, and China, France signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. On January 19, 2006, French President Jacques Chirac said that France was prepared to launch a nuclear strike against any country that sponsors a terrorist attack against French interests. He said, quote, "The leaders of states who would use terrorist means against us, as well as those who would envision using weapons of mass destruction, must understand that they would lay themselves open to a firm and fitting response on our part." End quote. Quote, "The flexibility and reaction of our strategic forces allow us to respond directly against the centers of power. All of our nuclear forces have been configured in this spirit." End quote. Chirac's comments came during a flurry of diplomatic efforts by France, Britain, Germany, and the United States to stop Iran from pursuing contested elements of its nuclear program. Chirac's comments in 2006 made France the 5th nuclear weapons state to threaten the use of nuclear weapons against their enemies since World War II.
There were many suspicions about North Korea's nuclear program and how it might be a source for developing weapons of mass destruction. With the fall of the Soviet Union, along with declining economic support, the Kim family pursued advancing its nuclear arsenal in order to preserve the government's regime at the expense of the well-being of their people. The majority of the North Korean crisis is mainly concerned with the USA and is split over 5 US presidential administrations. I will use each of these administrations to briefly trace the North Korean nuclear timeline. Beginning in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, the socialist nation quietly constructed plutonium-producing reactors about 90 kilometers north of Pyongyang. They also established nuclear reprocessing facilities that were capable of extracting bomb-grade plutonium. North Korea's nuclear program was made known internationally during Bush Sr.'s time in office, when satellite imagery of the research center and reprocessing facility was aired. Pyongyang produced its first plutonium through its graphite reactor by reprocessing the spent fuel. Concern was growing, as the world now knew the radical North Korean government possessed the materials to create a bomb. However, at this point in time, North Korea is still bound by the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty. The Clinton administration negotiated a freeze on North Korea's plutonium program with the agreed framework in 1994, which was outlined by Robert Gallucci, who is pictured here on your left. However, this agreement did not prevent North Korea from advancing its nuclear technologies. Furthermore, the country clandestinely pursued uranium centrifuge technologies and increased its nuclear import-export between Pakistan, Libya, Syria, and possibly Iran in order to gain weapons resources. The George W. Bush administration confronted North Korea about its apparent clandestine centrifuge program and effectively killed the agreed framework that Clinton had established. This led Pyongyang to restart its plutonium production reactor, reprocess plutonium from the stored spent fuel, and build a bomb. By 2003, North Korea formally withdrew from the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty. This bold move suggested North Korea's intentions on building a nuclear arsenal. Pyongyang conducted its first nuclear test in October 2006, a year after it signed a joint statement with the United States, China, and others in which it committed to abandoning all nuclear weapons and existing nuclear programs. Although the test was only partially successful, it marked a turning point in the North's nuclear program. The regime dropped all peaceful nuclear pretenses and declared itself a nuclear weapons state. It accelerated its centrifuge program while agreeing once again to freeze the plutonium production reactor. The Obama administration was greeted by a long-range rocket test, followed by a second nuclear test in May of 2009. The nuclear expansion continued through leadership change into Kim Jong-un. By 2014, North Korea had threatened Japan, South Korea, and the United States with preemptive nuclear strikes. This makes North Korea one of the few countries to threaten their enemies with nuclear weapons, and is a concern to the global community.
On July 16, 1945, the United States tested the world's first nuclear weapon in New Mexico. To date, United States remains the only country to have ever used a nuclear weapon in combat. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan, which resulted in the death of between 90,000 and 160,000 people. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, US dropped the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, Japan, which resulted in the death of between 40,000 and 80,000 people. Although the drop on Nagasaki, Japan remains the last use of a nuclear device in military combat, more than 2,000 nuclear weapons have been tested since.